The seal arrived on a Tuesday. I remember this because the fortress-monastery's chronoliths still functioned then, before everything that followed turned time itself into something we would rather forget. The courier wore the black of Terra's own messengers, his augmetic legs clicking against our polished floors with a rhythm that made servitors pause in their eternal labors. He carried the document in a stasis cylinder that hummed with its own power source, as if the words inside were too dangerous to exist in normal air. I was Brother-Sergeant Ardan of the Invictors Chapter, 3rd Company, Devastator Squad Ferris. My service record stretched back 137 years of measured violence in the Emperor's name. I had seen Xenos tear themselves from the bellies of their own dead to keep fighting. I had walked through the ash of virus-bombed worlds where the air itself tried to eat through ceramite. I had held the line at Korthok's gate while our ammunition counters clicked to 0 and we carved our names into history with combat knives and hatred. None of that prepared me for what happened when that seal broke. The Hall of Remembrance filled with every battle brother who could walk. Those on patrol received Vox summons that superseded their roots. The forges went quiet. The ranges emptied. Even the dreadnoughts stirred in their cradles, ancient Vox grills crackling with attention. Captain Dracus stood at the rostrum where we normally received combat honors, his scarred face carved from stone older than our chapter's founding. The envoy mounted the steps with deliberate ceremony, each footfall echoing in the vast space between our breathing. The cylinder opened with a hiss of escaped atmosphere. The parchment inside bore enough authentication to choke a data stack. Gene-coded verification, psychic impression seals, the personal cipher of the master of the administratum. The envoy's voice carried the flat affect of someone who had delivered death sentences before, would deliver them again, and slept perfectly between assignments. By decree of the High Lords of Terra, authenticated by the Ordo Hereticus, witnessed by the master of the Adeptus Astartes, let it be known that Brother Caelus of the Invictors Chapter stands accused of consorting with entities prescribed by the Lectitio Divinitatis, possession of archaeotech beyond sanctioned parameters, manipulation of gene seed archives for purposes unknown, and refusal to submit to purity audit following engagement at Hadrak Hive. The sentence is, Excommunicate Traitoris. Execution immediate. Assets void. Name struck. Let none speak of him save in damnation. The hall's temperature seemed to drop. Not from any environmental system, but from 300 transhuman hearts forgetting to beat for exactly 1 second. Caelus stood in the 4th rank, close enough that I could see the micro-tremor in his jaw muscle as he processed what had just been said. He was 2 meters of gene-forged warrior, wrapped in Mark 7th plate that bore kill markings from 3 separate crusades. The Damrose star gleamed on his pauldron, highest honor our chapter could bestow. He had pulled me from a burning rhino on Kalos Prime. He had taught half the scout initiates their blade forms. He had been the one who suggested the new patrol patterns that caught the cult uprising on Therix before it could spread. Now he was nothing. Less than nothing. A mistake to be corrected. The envoy produced bind manacles that glowed with suppression fields, designed to hold even our kind. Brother Caelus, you will submit to... I would speak. Caelus's voice cut through the formal recitation like a bolter through parchment. He stepped from the ranks, and we moved aside not from respect but from the instinct that keeps you clear of unexploded ordnance. His helm hung mag-locked at his belt. His eyes were gray like winter storms, focused not on the envoy but on Captain Dracus. I would speak to my brothers alone. The envoy's augmetic hand twitched toward the neural shunt at his temple, likely transmitting this deviation to whatever authority watched through his eyes. You have no standing to make requests. You are excommunicate. You are... Caelus moved with the economical violence we drill from the moment we wake in our pods as neophytes. His gauntleted hand closed around the envoy's throat. The augmetic voice box crackled once. The cervical vertebrae separated with a sound like kindling snapping. The body dropped, and Caelus stood over it with the same expression he wore during combat drills, focused, present, already calculating the next 3 moves. 300 bolters lifted in unison. The sound of that much ceramite and steel moving together could stop a mortal's heart. Caelus didn't flinch. He looked at Captain Dracus again, and in that look was something I had never seen in a brother's eyes before. Not defiance, not rage, but a terrible kind of sorrow, as if he mourned us more than himself. "You know what they found at Hadrach," he said. The captain's blade cleared its sheath with a singing note that had sent Xenos lords to their knees. "We know nothing. You are excommunicate. Submit or be destroyed." Caelus rolled his shoulders in the way we all did before a charge. "Then, you've already decided." What followed was not combat as we understood it. Combat has rules, patterns, a logic that even in its chaos follows certain laws. This was something else. Caelus drove into our front rank with the momentum of a drop pod, his shoulder catching Brother Caelus below the chest plate and lifting him off his feet. The bind manacles scattered across the floor. Someone fired, I think it was Korth from 2nd Squad, and the round sparked off Caelus's pauldron as he seized a chainsword from Tychus's nerveless fingers. The blade roared to life and carved through the air where 3 of us had been standing a heartbeat before. We scattered not from cowardice but from trained response to a threat we had never calculated, one of our own, armed, with nothing left to lose. Caelus didn't try to fight all of us. That would have been suicide even for him. Instead, he fought through us, using our mass and confusion like terrain features. When 5 brothers moved to flank him, he kicked over the commemoration of Talisar, a 3-ton marble cenotaph that had stood for 6 centuries. It toppled into their path, buying him seconds. He ripped a ceremonial spear from the shrine of first founding, a relic that predated our chapter, and hurled it with the precision of a hunter-killer missile. Brother Septimus, our Vox officer, had just enough time to look surprised before the spear punched through his primary heart and secondary heart in a single thrust, pinning him to the wall like a specimen in some mad surgeon's collection. Our communications died with him. Chaplain Mortius triggered the ward cants, those psychically charged battle hymns that could drive mortals to madness and space marines to fury. Caelus responded by tearing a purity bar from the primary dais, a length of sanctified adamantium, meant to represent our chapter's untainted gene seed, and swung it like a club into the Vox amplifier. The device exploded in a shower of sparks and sacred oil. The ward cants became static that scraped against our enhanced hearing like fingernails on glass. In the strobing light of damaged lumens, Caelus vaulted the choir rail with a grace that shouldn't have been possible in full plate. 3 brothers fired. Their rounds chewed through wooden pews that had heard 10,000 prayers. Caelus slid beneath the bolter fire, ceramite boots throwing sparks from the polished floor, and vanished into the processional tunnel that led to the inner cloisters. The entire engagement had lasted 37 seconds. 1 envoy dead. 1 brother dead. 3 wounded. 1,600 years of accumulated relics damaged or destroyed. And Caelus was loose in a fortress-monastery that he knew better than his own heartbeats. Captain Dracus's voice cut through the chaos with trained authority that could have commanded armies over the roar of artillery. Writ acknowledged and in force. All gates to red condition. Armory lockdown immediate. Servitor cohorts redirect from maintenance to interdiction protocols. Librarium authorized for predictive trace. Apothecarian to stand by for combat extractions. He turned to us, and his scarred face was a map of controlled fury. Squad assignments by veteran precedence. Every corridor becomes a kill zone, every doorway a trap. He is no longer Brother Caelus, he is a target. You will treat him as such. The chaplains began the rite of unnaming before we had even cleared the hall. I heard the servitors in the scriptorium receiving their orders through wall-mounted vox grills. Every mention of Caelus in our records was to be redacted with molecular acid. His gene seed samples would be marked with the black seal and locked in stasis. Kill tallies that bore his name would be recoded to show only unit designations. The heraldry servitors, ancient things that tended our battle standards with religious devotion, reversed his personal banner and carried it to the ash pits. They walked in funeral step, as if carrying a corpse. The fortress-monastery transformed around us. Blast doors that hadn't closed in decades groaned shut. Murder holes opened in ceilings we had walked beneath for centuries without thought. Servo skulls deployed with targeting lasers that painted red dots on every shadow. The very air changed as atmospheric processors switched to combat mixture higher oxygen for rapid movement, trace combat stims for enhanced reaction. Our home became a weapon, and we were merely components in its operation. I divided my squad according to the tactical parameters beaten into us during hypno-indoctrination. Brothers Marcus and Aurelius took the reactor access stairs. Caelus would need power for whatever he planned. Brothers Fung and Darius covered the vault crossways where our gene seed repositories connected to the main thoroughfare. Brothers Cassian and Nerva climbed to the choir level, where the astropaths dwelt in their brass cells. The rest followed me toward the inner cloisters where meditation cells and armory annexes created a maze of blind corners and narrow passages. We moved in overlapping bounds, each corridor covered by at least 2 firing angles. Every shrine we passed, those small altars where we performed private devotions, became a designated casualty collection point. Every statue of a past hero became cover we might need to destroy. The fortress sang with the sound of our boots on stone, the whir of servo-assisted joints, the click of ammunition feed cycling. It was the sound of a chapter eating itself. The first bodies appeared in the reliquary galleries. Brother Lucan lay twisted against the wall, his helm crushed so completely that the skull within had become a wet impression in ceramite. Brother Pramus had been folded backwards over a display case, his spine broken in 3 places, legs bent at angles that even our enhanced physiology couldn't achieve while living. Brother Torval was simply separated, torso on one side of the gallery, legs on the other. The cut so clean it looked industrial. The case of the Thunder Hammer times Desolation's Crown times stood open, its stasis field guttering like a dying star. That hammer had broken the spine of the orc warlord Grimfang. It had shattered the gates of the heretic fortress at Colchis Minoris. Now it served a brother we were sworn to kill. Auspex contact, Brother Marcus voxed. Heavy mass signature moving through the manufactorum arm, bearing 3-7 Mark II and displacing. We converged on the position, boots thundering through passages that had known only reverent silence for decades. Servitors shambled into our path, their lobotomized brains struggling to process conflicting directives, maintain the fortress, impede the excommunicate, avoid friendly casualties. We shouldered past them when possible, destroyed them when necessary. Their blood, what little remained, painted patterns on the walls that looked like accusations. The manufactorum arm housed our forge temples where tech marines performed the sacred maintenance that kept our weapons and armor functional. It was a cathedral of industry, pistons the size of land raiders pumping in eternal rhythm, conveyor systems, carrying materials through processes that had run unchanged since before any of us were born. The noise was tremendous, a physical thing that pressed against our auto senses. Perfect cover for someone who knew its patterns. We entered in a dispersed formation that maximized overlapping fields of fire while minimizing the risk of friendly casualties. Meltaguns tracked along the overhead gantries. Grenades hung from our belts like deadly fruit. The servitors here were different industrial models with cutting tools and welding arrays instead of hands. They continued their work, oblivious to our presence, sparks from their labors creating false positives on our motion trackers. A hydraulic press the size of a rhino slammed down where Brother Aurelius had been standing. He rolled clear, but the press cycled again and again, far faster than its normal operation. Caelus had overridden its safety protocols. We tracked the control lines to a maintenance booth suspended over the main floor. I put 3 rounds through its window. Empty. Contact front. Brother Feng's warning came simultaneously, with the thunder of Desolation's crown striking a support pillar. The pillar, thick as an ancient oak, cracked. The ceiling section it supported groaned. Caelus emerged from behind the falling debris, hammer already swinging for a second strike. We scattered as tons of rockcrete and metal crashed down, dividing our formation. He moved through the manufactorum like he owned it. Every piece of industrial equipment became a weapon or an obstacle in his hands. He triggered an emergency purge on a coolant tank, flooding a section with super-frozen vapor that turned our optics white. He reversed a conveyor to slam cargo containers into our advance. He fought like we had trained him to fight, using environment as a force multiplier, turning strength into weakness, making every advantage cost us. Brother Aurelius got too close. The hammer caught him across the chest, and his breastplate crumpled inward like parchment. The impact threw him into a grinding assembly that had been sanctified to produce bolter shells. The The machine didn't stop. It processed him with the same mechanical indifference it showed to raw materials. We heard his heart stop over the vox, 2 failing beats that sounded like surrender. "Pull back to junction 7 to 7, I ordered. We needed space, needed to stop reacting and start controlling the engagement. As we withdrew, I saw Caelus watching us from an elevated walkway. Blood ran from beneath his helm. One of our rounds had found a gap. He didn't pursue. He leaned on the hammer like a walking staff, and gave us a salute that might have been mockery or might have been farewell. Vox traffic flooded our channels as other squads reported similar contacts. Squad Joran had cornered him in the transit spine only to lose 2 brothers when he brought down a section of pipe that had been carrying blessed promethium. The explosion could be felt 3 levels away. Squad Tactical Ferrum found evidence he had breached the archives. Several demolition charges were missing from inventory, charges that weren't distributed through normal channels but kept for special circumstances. The master of the forge's voice crackled through, tight with barely controlled fury. 3 melta bombs unaccounted for. Cabinet 7 to 9 breached, locking all remaining stocks with Omnissiah's 3rd cipher. The captain processed this information and adjusted our deployment. Caelus wasn't just running. He was arming himself for something larger. The obvious targets were limited. Destroy our gene seed vaults and cripple our future, destroy the reactor and take the entire fortress with him, or reach the beacon tower and broadcast something to whoever might be listening. Each possibility required a different response. The captain, veteran of 600 years of war, made his choice. All squads converge on critical infrastructure. Librarium, to provide predictive modeling. We stop him before he reaches any primary target. We closed on the fortress's heart, like antibodies responding to infection. Every step took us deeper into spaces that had been sanctuary, turning them into kill zones. We pulled the manual locks on the hangar bays, denying him any chance of escape via Thunderhawk or strike cruiser. Void shutters slammed closed with impacts that shook dust from ceilings that hadn't known disruption since their construction. Atmospheric shields flickered to their hardest setting, turning our fortress into a cage. But Caelus knew our procedures better than we did. He had helped write half of them. Instead of challenging our preparations, he diverted to the novice training ranges. We found him loading crates of training grenades onto a cargo hauler. Not the live ordnance from the primary armory, but practice weapons that scout initiates used to learn blast patterns. Brother Cassian moved to intercept. Caelus triggered the hauler's emergency acceleration and rode it like a battering ram through our perimeter. The training grenades weren't meant to kill space marines, but Caelus didn't use them as weapons. He used them as tools. Small charges placed at structural weak points, creating new passages through walls we had never considered breachable. He cut through the north transept, using a pattern that spoke of intimate knowledge. He had designed these very routes for emergency evacuation drills. We glimpsed him once more at the Chapel of Oaths, that sacred space where we had sworn our dedication to the chapter. He stood at the altar where his own oath-taking had been recorded in the crystal matrices that preserved our history. For a moment, I thought he might surrender, might accept the judgment, and die with whatever honor remained. Then he gripped the head of St. Corvus's statue, a marble masterwork that had survived the chapter's founding, and tore it free. The head flew into our ranks like a siege round. Brothers Feng and Darius went down in a tangle of limbs and ceramite. Caelus leapt across the choir pit, a jump that should have been impossible in full plate but somehow wasn't. He landed light as a scout, already moving before our targeting systems could track. In that moment, watching him move through spaces I had walked for over a century, I understood something that made my primary heart skip. He wasn't running from us. He was running towards something, and we were merely obstacles in his path. Captain Dracus must have reached the same conclusion. His next orders came with the weight of terrible necessity. Full combat lockdown. Dreadnought Honoris Aeternum to active status. Librarian Prendis authorized for combat prescience. All brothers to convergence pattern Omega. We end this in the reactor hall. The reactor hall, the fortress-monastery's beating heart, where plasma energies that could level mountains were contained by faith and technology in equal measure. If Caelus reached it, if he could damage the containment systems, the explosion wouldn't just kill us. It would turn the entire mountain into a crater visible from orbit. It would erase 10,000 years of history in nuclear fire. But there was another possibility, one that chilled me more than destruction. What if he didn't want to destroy the reactor? What if he wanted to use it? The amount of power flowing through those systems could boost a Vox signal strong enough to reach any ship within the system, strong enough to carry whatever message he believed was worth all of this. We ran through corridors that blurred together, past serfs who pressed themselves against walls in terror, past cherubim that sang funeral dirges in binary. Every step carried the weight of what we were about to do, not just kill a brother, but erase him so completely that future generations would never know he existed. This was the true meaning of Excommunicate Traitoris. Not the death, but the unmaking that followed. We reached the outer seal of the reactor hall, as warning lumens painted everything in radioactive amber. Honoris Aeternum stood ready, the dreadnought's massive frame blocking the primary entrance. Steam vented from his heavy flamers in anticipation. Inside his sarcophagus, Brother Veteran Gaius had fought for 600 years before earning his eternal rest in ceramite and adamantium. His Vox grill crackled with static that might have been words or might have been rage. Target approaching from Transit Shaft 9, Librarian Prentice announced, his psychic hood crackling with prescient energy. Probability chains converging. He will attempt entry through the maintenance cycle ports. Those ports were barely wide enough for unarmored humans. The idea of a fully armed space marine forcing through them was absurd. But then, everything about this day had been absurd. We repositioned, creating overlapping kill zones that covered every possible angle of approach. Meltaguns charged with rising winds. Bolt rounds clicked into chambers. The air grew thick with the smell of sanctified oils and pre-combat chemicals. The first we knew of his arrival was the scream of tearing metal. Caelus had widened the port with 3 precise strikes of the thunderhammer, creating a gap just large enough for his frame. He came through like a round from a bolter, hammer first, into the middle of our formation. The weapon's head glowed cherry red from the friction of his passage. When it connected with Brother Marcus's shield, the ceramite didn't just break, it liquefied. We closed on him from 6 angles, and somehow he found the gaps between them all. The hammer swept low, taking legs. It rose high, crushing helms. It spun in arcs that turned the air into a death zone measured in meters. But we had numbers, and we had the rage of betrayal driving us. For every brother that fell, 2 more pressed forward. Our blades found gaps in his armor. Our rounds chewed through ceramite that had deflected Xeno's claws and heretic bullets. His blood painted the floor in patterns that looked like the tactical maps we studied. He was slowing. We were winning. And in that moment of certain victory, Caelus did something that changed everything. He spoke my name, Ardan. The voice came through external speakers, crackling with damage but unmistakably his. You remember Garros Basin. You remember what we found. The words hit harder than any hammer blow. Garros Basin, a compliance action that had turned into something else. We had found things in the deep vaults that shouldn't have existed. Archaeotech that predated the Imperium, maybe predated humanity itself. The Inquisition had arrived within hours of our report, sealed everything, told us to forget. We had obeyed. We had forgotten. Except clearly, Caelus hadn't. Whatever you think you're doing, I managed through gritted teeth, parrying another swing that would have taken my head. It ends here. No, brother, it begins here. He feinted left, drove right, and suddenly the hammer wasn't aimed at us but at the reactor's coolant controls. Captain Dracus roared a denial that carried the authority of his centuries. Caelus's hand never reached the panel. 3 melta beams converged on his position, forcing him to dive aside or be vaporized. We herded him. That's what it was, not combat but a hunt, driving prey toward the killing ground. Every move he made, we had 2 brothers ready to counter. Every gap he found, we closed before he could exploit it. The reactor hall became a 3-dimensional chess game, where every piece wanted to kill the king. Honoris Aeternum anchored our center line, the dreadnought's bulk making him an immovable point around which our formation flowed. His heavy flamers created walls of fire that turned space into binary choices, burn or redirect. The ancient warrior within spoke through Vox grills that hadn't been serviced in decades. You shame us all, whelp. You shame the very stones that sheltered you. The stones shelter lies. Caelus shot back, using a fallen brother's corpse as a shield against another melta burst. The body of Brother Nerva, who had sung in the choir, who had carved tiny eagles from bone in his spare moments, turned to ash and memory. The whole Imperium is built on lies, and you choose blindness over truth. Chaplain Mordius waded in with his Crozius Arcanum, spinning complex patterns that were part weapon form, part benediction. Heresy from a heretic's mouth. You prove your guilt with every breath. The Crozius met the hammer in a clash that sent shockwaves through the deck plating. For 3 seconds they stood locked, strength against strength, faith against desperation. Then Caelus did something I had only seen once before, in a training cage when we were still scouts. He let go of his weapon. The sudden absence of resistance sent Mordius stumbling forward. Caelus flowed around him like water, seized the chaplain's gorget, and drove his knee into the weak point where chest plate met codpiece. Mordius folded. Caelus retrieved his hammer and brought it down, but 3 brothers were already there, shields locked, taking a blow that would have ended our spiritual leader. Probability flux, Librarian Prentice announced, his voice strained with the effort of reading potential futures. He's not trying to destroy the reactor, he's throne of Earth. He's trying to reach the astropathic choir. The reactor is a feint. The captain processed this in the space between heartbeats. 2nd and 3rd squads to the choir towers. 4th maintains perimeter here. Do not let him double back. We split our forces, and I knew we all knew that this was what Caelus wanted. Divide us, create gaps, find the weakness in our coverage. But we had no choice. If he reached the astropaths, if he could force them to send whatever message drove him to this madness, the damage would spread beyond our fortress. Other chapters would hear. The Inquisition would come not as allies but as executioners. Our entire brotherhood would burn for one man's heresy. I led my reduced squad up the spiral stairs that connected the reactor level to the choir towers. These passages were narrower than the main corridors, built for single-file processionals rather than tactical movement. Our pauldrons scraped against walls carved with 10,000 years of devotional scripts. Every step echoed in the confined space, announcing our position to anyone who knew how to listen. The first demolition charge detonated when Brother Cassian was halfway through a doorway. The blast didn't kill him, we're too tough for that, but it buried him under tons of rubble that would take hours to clear. His vitals flickered on my display, stable but trapped. We pressed on, leaving him entombed in stone and shame. The second charge was smarter, placed not to kill but to redirect. It collapsed a section of floor, forcing us to detour through the manuscript halls where ancient servitor scribes continued their endless copying of approved texts. They didn't look up as we passed. Their lobotomized focus was absolute, styluses scratching against parchment even as the fortress shook with violence. We found Caelus at the threshold of the choir sanctum. The astropaths dwelt beyond in their brass cells, minds too valuable to risk but too dangerous to leave uncontained. He stood with the hammer raised, ready to breach the psychically warded doors that kept the choir isolated from stray thoughts and hostile influences. Destroying those wards would be like setting fire to a library of screaming souls. Stop! The word came from my mouth before I could think. Not an order, not a threat, just a plea from one brother to another. Whatever truth you think you've found, this isn't the way. He turned to look at me, and through his damaged helm's optics I saw something that stopped my hearts. Tears. Actual tears, running down a face that had been engineered to feel no fear, no doubt, only purpose. There is no other way, Ardan. They made sure of that when they buried the truth beneath so much blood that we can't smell anything else. What truth? Captain Dracus had arrived with reinforcements, surrounding Caelus in a circle of bolters and blades. What possible revelation justifies this massacre? Caelus laughed, and it was the sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. The Emperor, Librarian Prentice struck before the sentence could finish. Not with blade or bolter, but with pure psychic force, a hammer of thought that should have pulped Caelus's brain inside his skull. Instead, it struck something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The psychic feedback threw Prentice to his knees, blood streaming from his nose, eyes, ears. Hexagrammic wards, he gasped. He's, throne preserve us, he's warded against psychic interrogation. That's not possible unless, Unless someone taught me, Caelus finished. Someone who knew what questions would be asked. Someone who wanted to make sure the answers died with me. The implication of those words rippled through our ranks. Someone within our chapter, maybe within the higher echelons of command, had prepared Caelus for this moment, either to enable his heresy or to ensure it could never be fully understood. Both possibilities were poison. Captain Dracus made a decision that would haunt him unto death. Burn him. 3 flamers opened up simultaneously, bathing Caelus in promethium fire that could melt steel. He stood in the inferno for 1 second, 2, 3, his armor surface ablating, warning runes dying on our displays as his systems overloaded. Then he charged. Not toward us, but toward the wall. The hammer, now glowing white-hot, struck a precise point in the masonry. The wall didn't just break, it exploded outward in a shower of superheated stone. Beyond was a maintenance shaft that connected to the fortress's original construction, passages that existed on no current schematic. Caelus dove through, leaving only burning air and the smell of scorched ceramite. Ancient ways, Brother Torin, our eldest member, said with something like awe. He knows the ancient ways. Passages from before the reconstruction, before the compliance, from when this was. He stopped himself, but we all knew what he meant to say. From when this fortress served another purpose, perhaps another master, in the ages before the Emperor's light reached this world. We pursued, but pursuing a space marine through passages he knows, and you don't, is like chasing smoke through a forest fire. We found evidence of his passage, blood drops that hissed with residual heat, scratches where the hammer had struck walls for momentum, the lingering ozone smell of overtaxed armor systems, but not Caelus himself. All squads report, the captain commanded. The responses painted a picture of orchestrated chaos. Squad Ferrum had lost another brother to a collapsing ceiling. Squad Tactical had cornered Caelus near the Gene Seed vaults only to discover they had been chasing a servitor wearing his beacon while he circled behind them. Squad Devastator reported heavy damage to the librarium's restricted archives, though what had been taken or destroyed remained unclear. He's not trying to escape, I said, understanding finally dawning. He's gathering something. Evidence, maybe, or tools, or weapons, Master of the Forge Caelus interrupted over Vox. Phosphex grenades from the Heresy-era vault. 2 containers. If he deploys them, we all knew what Phosphex could do. The crawling death that burned through anything organic, that could only be stopped by void exposure or running out of fuel to consume. In the confined spaces of the fortress, it would be a massacre. Where would he go? Captain Dracus asked, though we could all see him working through the same calculations. What target justifies that level of destruction? The answer came from an unexpected source. Honoris Aeternum, his ancient vox cutting through our chatter with the certainty of someone who had seen patterns repeat across centuries. The sacred crypt, where we enter the command staff, where the old records are kept in stasis, where the chapter master's memories are preserved in crystal matrices. He seeks the past to damn the present. The sacred crypt lay beneath the fortress, deeper than the dungeons, deeper than the foundation stones, carved into bedrock that had been old when Terra's light first touched the stars. Only the captain and chaplains held access. Only they knew what truths or lies might be buried there alongside our honored dead. Captain Dracus's next words carried the weight of final judgment. Full combat deployment to the crypt. Honoris Aeternum to lead. Authorization for terminal force. No preservation protocols. We burn everything if necessary. We descended through passages that grew older with every level. Ferrocrete gave way to carved stone. Carved stone gave way to natural rock that showed tool marks from before the Imperium standardized construction methods. The air grew thick with age, and the peculiar cold that comes from being too far from any Sunday. The crypt's outer seal had been cut with surgical precision, the melta-charge placed exactly where it would cause maximum breach with minimum structural damage. Inside, Phosphex burned with its characteristic green-white flame, consuming wooden reliquaries that had stood for millennia. Through the chemical fire, we saw Caelus at the far end, standing before the crystal matrices that contained our chapter's earliest records. He held a data slate in one hand, the thunder hammer in the other. His armor was more gap than plate now, the underlying mesh visible through tears and breaks. Blood ran from dozens of wounds. His breathing came in rattles that spoke of lungs damaged by heat and chemical smoke. But his eyes, visible through his shattered helm, were clear and focused and terrible. 10 seconds, he said. That's all I need to transmit this. 10 seconds to show the Imperium what the Space Marines really are, what we were made from, what we were meant to become. Lies, Chaplain Mordius snarled, advancing through the phosphex with faith as his shield. Whatever fabrication you found, not found, remembered, hidden in the only place they couldn't scrub clean, the matrix containing First Captain Idris's dying thoughts. Would you like to know what he saw, Chaplain? Would you like to know what revelation killed him? The data slate's screen cast sick light across Caelus's face. Whatever was displayed there, we couldn't see it from our positions. But we could see its effect on him, the way his enhanced physiology tried to reject what his mind was processing, micro-tremors in his jaw, his pupils dilating and contracting, as if trying to find a focal length that would make the impossible untrue. Brother, I tried one more time, stepping through phosphex that ate at my boots with molecular hunger. Whatever burden you carry, let us carry it with you. Don't die alone with it. He looked at me with something that might have been gratitude or might have been pity. That's the point, Ardan. We all die alone with it. Every Space Marine who learns the truth. That's why it must be shared so the dying can stop. Captain Dracus gave no further warnings. His bolt pistol spoke with the authority of his office, a 3-round burst that should have taken Caelus center mass. But damaged as he was, Caelus still moved like the warrior we'd trained beside for centuries. He pivoted, let the rounds spark off his pauldron, and brought the hammer up in an arc that caught Brother Feng under the chin. The impact didn't just kill. It erased everything above the gorget, spreading Feng across the ceiling in a pattern that looked like a red constellation. We closed from all sides, accepting losses to gain inches. The phosphex made everything a nightmare of green flame and crawling death, but we were Space Marines. We had been built to fight in hell and call it Tuesday. Brother Marcus took a hammer blow that caved in his chest but managed to lock his arms around Caelus's waist before dying, anchoring him for the seconds we needed. Brother Aurelius's chainsword found a gap in the armor and drank deep before Caelus could twist away. The thunder hammer fell from nerveless fingers. Caelus dropped to one knee, tried to rise, fell again. The data slate clattered across stone worn smooth by centuries of reverent footsteps. Captain Dracus kicked it away before any of us could see what it displayed. Later, I would wonder if that was wisdom or cowardice. In the moment, I was only grateful. Caelus crawled toward the crystal matrices with the determination of a dying sun still burning through its last hydrogen. His broken armor scraped against stone, leaving a trail of blood and ceramite fragments. One arm hung useless, the other pulled him forward by fingertips alone. He was trying to reach something specific, one particular crystal among hundreds, its surface clouded with age and microscopic fractures. Please, he said, and the word was wrong in a Space Marine's mouth. We were not built to plead. We were built to endure. Let me show you. Let me show someone. The truth needs to live, even if we don't. Librarian Prentice approached with his force sword drawn, the blade wreathed in psychic frost that made the phosphex recoil. I'll take it from your mind if I have to. The truth, the lies, all of it. You can't. Caelus managed something like a smile through blood-frothed lips. They made sure of that. Hexagrammic wards go both ways. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The perfect prison for an inconvenient truth. Then it dies with you, Captain Dracus said, raising his blade for the execution cut. No. Caelus's hand finally found what it sought, not a crystal but a hidden switch beneath it, craftsmanship so subtle it had escaped 10,000 years of maintenance. It dies with all of us. The floor began to vibrate. Not the harsh shake of demolition charges, but something deeper. A resonance that seemed to come from the planet's core. Dust fell from ceilings that hadn't known disturbance since their carving. The crystal matrices began to sing, each one vibrating at a frequency that made our enhanced bones ache. Reactor cascade. Master of the Forge Caelus announced with mechanical calm. He's triggered a feedback loop through the fortress's power grid. Estimation: 15 minutes to critical failure. 15 minutes to evacuate a fortress-monastery. Impossible. Even if we abandoned everything, saved no relics, left our history to burn, we couldn't get everyone clear. The serfs, the servitors, The brothers in stasis, the gene seed vault, something would have to be sacrificed. Override it, Captain Dracus commanded. Cannot. The command originated from. Caelus paused, and when he continued, his voice carried notes of disbelief, even through vox distortion. From the throne mechanicum in the depths. From systems that predate our occupation. He's not using our reactor controls, he's using the original ones, from when this was a Legion fortress. Caelus finished, blood bubbling on his lips. From before Guilliman's reforms, before the chapters, when we were something else, something honest about what we were. The implications of that statement would have started wars if spoken in the wrong chambers. A Legion fortress meant this place had served the Emperor's forces before the heresy, before the breaking of the legions into chapters. But which legion? And why had that information been hidden? Irrelevant, Captain Dracus decided. Evacuate all non-combat personnel, priority to gene seed vaults. Brothers, we have a duty. We all understood. We would stay. We would ensure Caelus died before the reactor cascade peaked. We would contain whatever truth he carried, even if it meant our own immolation. This was what loyalty meant, not to live for the Emperor, but to die for the silence he required. But Caelus wasn't finished. Even dying, even broken, he had one more play. His functional hand found a grenade at his belt, not phosphex, just a simple frag grenade, the kind we had used as scouts. He didn't throw it at us. He threw it at the ceiling, at a specific point where moisture stains suggested ancient waterways beyond the stone. The explosion wasn't much by our standards, but it was enough. Water began to pour through the breach, not a flood, but a steady stream that hit the phosphex and turned instantly to superheated steam. The chemical fire didn't go out, but it began to move, carried by convection currents into new patterns. Visibility dropped to meters, then less. In the chaos of steam and flame and failing lights, Caelus vanished. Thermal tracking, I called, switching through visual modes. But the phosphex burned too hot, the steam scattered infrared, and our armor systems were never designed for this particular hell. Motion sensors, Brother Titus suggested. Useless, Techmarine Septimus replied. The cascade is vibrating everything. Can't separate his movement from background noise. We spread through the crypt in search patterns that had worked in 100 different battles. But those battles had been against enemies, not brothers. Caelus knew our patterns because he had helped design them. Every time we thought we had him cornered, we found only shadows and steam. Every time our auspex pinged contact, it turned out to be another brother or a falling piece of masonry. Minutes passed, the vibration grew worse. Somewhere above us, I heard the fortress's emergency bells beginning their death toll, a sound that hadn't been heard since the fortress's construction. Serf quarters would be evacuating. The apothecarian would be loading stasis caskets onto evacuation. Thunderhawks. Our legacy would survive, even if we didn't. Found him, Honoris Aeternum announced, his massive frame unmoved by the shaking that had us bracing against walls. North corner, behind the Testimonial of Fury. We converged on the position. The Testimonial of Fury was a monument to our chapter's first great victory, a pillar of black marble carved with the names of the dead. Caelus sat with his back against it, the data slate in his lap, typing with his one functional hand. His armor was more memory than metal now. Every breath was a wet rattle that spoke of lungs filling with blood. Last testament, he said without looking up. Every condemned man gets last words. Not traitors, Chaplain Mortius spat. Then call me loyal and kill me anyway. It won't be the first lie we've told. Captain Dracus raised his bolt pistol, but Honoris Aeternum's massive hand stopped him. Not physically. The dreadnought was too far away, but the gesture carried weight. Let him speak. The ancient warrior rumbled. We're all dead anyway. Let the words die with us. Caelus looked up at that, and for a moment I saw the brother I had known, the one who had laughed at impossible odds, who had carved wooden aquilas during the long transits between war zones, who had once spent 3 days teaching a group of hive children how to maintain lost weapons because he said knowledge was the only gift that couldn't be stolen. I found it at Hadrach Hive, he began. Not the thing itself, but references to it. Archaeotech from before Old Night, but not STC something else. something that remembered what we were before the Emperor found us, before the gene seed, before the conditioning. He coughed, and blood painted the data slate's screen. Do you know what Space Marines are, brothers? Not the mythology, not the propaganda, but the truth? The Emperor's angels of death, Brother Marcus quoted from our earliest catechisms. No, we're the failed prototype. The words hung in the air like phosphex smoke, burning everything they touched. The Thunder Warriors were the first attempt too unstable, too independent. They were purged after unity. We were the second more stable, but still flawed. Still capable of corruption, of doubt, of choosing something other than blind obedience. The heresy proved that. Heresy from a heretic, Mortius said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Primarchs were never meant to lead us, Caelus continued. They were meant to replace us. 20 versions of humanity perfected, each one designed to make their gene sons obsolete once the Great Crusade ended. But the Chaos Gods corrupted that plan. So the Emperor tried again. Third time's the charm. He laughed, wet and broken. Primaris Marines. Cael's innovation. Except Cael didn't innovate anything. He just found the Emperor's original blueprints, the ones for what we were always meant to become. Bigger, stronger, more stable, less human, less capable of choosing anything but obedience. The fortress shook again, harder this time. Somewhere above, I heard the distinctive shriek of metal tearing. The reactor cascade was accelerating. Even if that were true, Captain Dracus said slowly, each word measured, it changes nothing. We are what we are. We serve as we serve. Do we? Caelus managed to stand, using the pillar for support. Or do we just die on schedule whenever the Imperium needs us to? Look at our history, brothers. Every founding, every crusade, every last stand, we're not warriors, we're ammunition. Expended and replaced, over and over, each iteration a little less human than the last. 10 minutes to critical failure, Caelus announced. The truth, Caelus held up the data slate, is all here. First Captain Idris found it during the compliance of Caris. The Inquisition killed him for it, made it look like enemy action. But he managed to record it in the crystal matrix during his death trauma when the recording systems couldn't filter his thoughts. Every Space Marine who's learned this truth has died within days. Accidents, enemy action, sudden illness, our enhanced physiologies shouldn't allow. We're not permitted to know what we are. And yet you live, I pointed out, because I prepared. Because someone warned me, someone high enough to know the pattern, low enough to still have a conscience. They gave me the hexagrammic wards, told me to look where others wouldn't, helped me understand what I was seeing. His legs gave out, and he slid back down the pillar. But they also told me it was pointless. That the truth would die with me like it died with all the others. That the Imperium would endure on the foundation of its lies. Captain Dracus made his decision. Give me the slate. We all turned to stare at him. Even Honoris Aeternum's sarcophagus seemed to pivot with surprise. Captain, Mortius warned, the writ is clear. All materials are to be destroyed. The writ assumes we survive to report. Dracus held out his hand to Caelus. Give me the slate, and I'll ensure it reaches someone who can judge its truth. Not the Inquisition, not the High Lords. Someone who might actually act on it if it's real. Who? Caelus asked. Guilliman himself walks among us again. If anyone has the authority to hear this truth and survive it, it's a Primarch. The offer hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Caelus studied the captain's face, looking for deception, finding something else, perhaps the same doubt that had driven him to this extremity, just expressed differently. 5 minutes to critical failure. Caelus pushed the data slate across the blood-slicked floor. Captain Dracus picked it up without looking at the screen, mag-locking it to his belt. Now the rest, the captain said. The archaeotech from Hadrach, where is it? Gone. Destroyed. I burned it after I learned what it could do. Caelus closed his eyes. It was a weapon, but not the kind that kills bodies. It killed lies. Stripped away mental conditioning, removed hypno-indoctrination, dissolved the psychological barriers that keep us loyal. One exposure and a Space Marine remembered what doubt felt like, what choice felt like, what it meant to be human. 3 minutes to critical failure, cascade acceleration detected. We need to move, I said. Captain, we need to. No. Dracus stood perfectly still, data slate at his hip. blade in hand. We have one duty left. The fortress is lost. Our brothers above will preserve what can be preserved. We ensure this ends here. Understanding dawned cold as the void. We weren't just going to die in the cascade. We were going to ensure Caelus died first, then stand witness to prevent any possibility of his survival, his escape, or his resurrection. We were going to burn with him to make absolutely certain the contamination didn't spread. It's too late anyway, Caelus said. Even if you wanted to run, the cascade has reached the auxiliary generators. The blast doors are sealed on emergency power. We're all trapped down here together. He managed something like a smile. Fitting, really. The truth and the lies dying together in the dark. 1 minute to critical failure. The vibration had become a roar. Cracks appeared in walls that had stood for millennia. The crystal matrices began to shatter one by one. Each destruction a small symphony of breaking glass and lost history. The phosphex finally guttered out, consumed its fuel, leaving us in darkness lit only by failing emergency lumens and the glow of our armor's dying systems. Any last words? Captain Dracus asked Caelus. True last words? Caelus thought for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was clear despite the blood in his lungs. I was loyal. Right until the end, I was loyal. Just not to the lie we've become. I was loyal to what we should have been. 30 seconds to critical failure. Captain Dracus raised his blade. You were my brother, that's the only truth that matters. The blade fell. Caelus died. And in the last seconds before the cascade peaked, I saw Captain Dracus look at the data slate screen. His expression changed. I couldn't say how exactly. Our enhanced faces aren't designed for subtle emotion, but something shifted in his eyes, some fundamental understanding rearranging itself. Then the world became light and fury and nothing at all. I died for 17 minutes. The apothecaries told me this later, after they had scraped enough of me from the ruins to rebuild around. My primary heart stopped when the reactor's magnetic containment failed. My secondary heart lasted another 4 minutes before the radiation cooked it inside my chest. My brain, protected by the adamantium shell of my helm and the emergency stasis field that triggered when my vital signs flatlined, survived just long enough for the recovery teams to find me beneath 12 meters of collapsed stone and molten ceramite. They found me because I was still holding Caelus's helm. I don't remember picking it up. The last clear memory I have is Captain Dracus's face illuminated by the data slate screen, that moment of terrible understanding before everything became nuclear fire. But when they dug me out 43 hours after the cascade, his helm was maglocked to my belt, its surface scorched black but intact. Inside, they found something that shouldn't have existed. A secondary data crystal hidden in the helm's memory buffer, encrypted with codes that predated our chapter's founding. The Inquisition arrived before I regained consciousness. 3 full interrogator teams, 2 Lords Inquisitor, and enough stormtroopers to pacify a hive city. They sealed our entire system, deployed interdiction fields around our destroyed fortress, and began the kind of investigation that usually ended with virus bombs and redacted history. Every survivor was isolated, questioned, mind-scrubbed, questioned again. The serfs were executed after debriefing a mercy, considering what usually happened to witnesses of Space Marine disgrace. 42 brothers had survived the cascade, mostly those who had been on patrol or aboard our fleet when Caelus made his last stand. Captain Dracus was not among them. Neither were any who had been in the crypt when the reactor blew. I was a miracle, they said, though the word tasted like ash when the apothecary spoke it. A miracle with third-degree burns over 70% of my body, organs rebuilt from vat-grown tissue, and memories that came in fragments sharp enough to cut. Lord Inquisitor Kastner supervised my interrogation personally. She was a small woman, baseline human, the kind who would have been invisible in any crowd if not for the rosette that gave her authority over posthuman warriors. Her psychic probe felt like cold needles pushing through my brain, searching for any trace of corruption, any hint that Caelus's heresy had taken root. Tell me about the data slate, she said on the 3rd day, after my lungs had been regrown enough to speak without blood frothing at my lips. The captain took it. It burned with him. Tell me what was on it. I never saw the screen clearly. The phosphex smoke, the steam visibility was minimal. Tell me what Caelus said about it. This was the trap. Every question circled back to the same point. What truth had driven a decorated veteran to massacre his brothers? The Inquisition knew something had been discovered at Hadrak Hive. They knew First Captain Idris had died under suspicious circumstances millennia ago. They knew these facts were connected, but not how. They needed my testimony to fill the gaps, to understand what they were trying to bury. He spoke of lies, I said, the words carefully chosen to be true without being revealing. He claimed the Imperium was built on them. All heretics claim that. What specific lies? He said we were replaceable. That space marines were designed to die. Kastner's stylus scratched across her data slate. Behind her, a servo skull recorded everything with the patient attention of the mechanically lobotomized. That's a philosophical position, not heresy. What else? The interrogations followed this pattern for weeks. Questions that probed without revealing what they already knew. Repetitions designed to catch inconsistencies. Psychic scans that left me vomiting blood while they searched for memories I might have suppressed. They were thorough in the way that only those truly afraid could be. The other survivors received similar treatment, though none as intensive as mine. I had been closest to Caelus at the end. I had heard his last words. I carried the suspicion of knowledge, like a disease that might be communicable. Brother Marcus, rebuilt like me from barely living tissue, broke on the 7th day and begged them to execute him rather than continue the questions. They refused. The dead couldn't testify to their innocence. On the 31st day, something changed. Lord Inquisitor Kastner arrived with different attendants, not her usual coterie of savants and lexicographers, but hard-faced individuals in unmarked power armor. One carried a stasis casket that hummed with active containment fields. Another bore equipment I recognized from our destroyed fortress, the memory core from Honoris Aeternum's sarcophagus. We recovered this from the ruins, Kastner said, setting the core on the medical bay's single table. The dreadnought's consciousness survived the cascade. His testimony has been illuminating. The blood in my rebuilt veins turned to ice. Honoris Aeternum had been there for all of it, had heard every word, had seen the captain take the data slate. His ancient mind, preserved in blessed amniotic fluid, would have recorded everything with the perfect clarity of the machine-bound. He confirms your account, Kastner continued, and I couldn't tell if she was disappointed or relieved. Mostly. But there are discrepancies, small ones, the kind that suggest either damaged memory engrams or deliberate omission. She produced a hollow projector and activated it. The image that formed was grainy, compiled from multiple armor feeds and the dreadnought's own optical sensors. It showed the moment of Caelus's death, the captain's blade falling, the light of recognition in dying eyes. But the angle was wrong. Where I remembered standing gave me no view of the captain's face when he looked at the data slate. Yet in my testimony, I had described his expression. How did you see what you claimed to have seen? The truth was dangerous. In those last seconds, as the cascade reached criticality, I had moved. Not to escape, there was nowhere to run but to look over the captain's shoulder, to see what truth was worth all this death. I had glimpsed 3 words before the world ended. Primarch genetic template. Nothing more, nothing less. But those 3 words had recontextualized everything. The angles were confused, I said. The steam, the failing lights. Memory plays tricks. Memory, Kastner repeated, then gestured to her attendants. The stasis casket opened with a hiss. Inside, cushioned by fields that kept it stable at the molecular level, was Caelus's helm. We found this attached to your belt. Why? I don't remember taking it. Your armor's cogitator does. It recorded the magnetic seal engaging 4 seconds before the cascade peaked. A deliberate action, not accident or debris impact. You chose to take it. The helm sat between us like an accusation. Its surface bore the scars of impossible heat. Ceramite fused into patterns that looked almost organic. The left lens was shattered. The right had melted and reformed into something that resembled an eye squeezed shut against unbearable light. Perhaps I wanted evidence of his death. Perhaps, or perhaps you wanted what was hidden inside. She produced the data. Crystal they had found held it up to the medical bay's harsh light. Encrypted with pre-Imperial codes. The Mechanicus says it would take 1,000 years to break without the key. Unless, of course, someone already knew what it contained. This was the killing question. If I knew the crystal's contents, I was corrupted. If I didn't, I was useless to her investigation. Either answer could end with a bolt shell or a mind wipe that would leave me vegetative. I know what Caelus believed it contained, I said carefully. His truth about space marines being prototypes, about the Primarchs being our replacements. Heresy born from data, misinterpreted or falsified. Is that what you believe? I believe in the Emperor. I believe in the Imperium. I believe my brother died a traitor, whatever his intentions. Kastner studied me for a long moment. Her baseline human eyes gave away nothing. They hadn't been engineered for war like mine, but they had been trained for judgment. The crystal contains technical specifications, she finally said. Genetic manipulation protocols. Enhancement procedures that predate our current methods by millennia. The kind of information that could revolutionize space marine creation, or reveal uncomfortable truths about our past. She stood, gestured for her attendants to pack the evidence. This matter is sealed under Vermilion-level classification. You will not speak of it. You will not think of it. If you dream of it, you will report for memory adjustment. Your chapter will be rebuilt under new leadership, your fortress reconstructed with no trace of its former secrets. You will continue to serve as you always have as a weapon of the Emperor's will. And if the truth Caelus found was real, the question escaped before wisdom could stop it. Kastner paused at the doorway, her slight frame backlit by the corridor's lumens. Truth is what the Imperium requires it to be, Brother Sergeant. Your friend forgot that. Don't make the same mistake. They left me with the medical servitors and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Outside, through the hardened window, I could see our destroyed fortress. The mountain had been carved open like a thorax during surgery, its guts spilled across kilometers of scorched earth. Recovery teams moved through the wreckage like insects, cleaning a corpse, salvaging what meaning they could from the devastation. 3 days later, they brought me what remained of our chapter's command structure. Acting Captain Lucian, one of 3 surviving sergeants. Chaplain Galvin, pulled from patrol duty to replace Mordius. Librarian Ashford, so young his psychic hood still gleamed with manufacture oils. We met in what had been a storage bay, now converted to a temporary command post. Maps of our destroyed fortress covered every surface, marked with red zones where radiation still cooked, black zones where nothing remained to recover. The Inquisition has released their preliminary findings, Lucian reported. His augmetic arm, a replacement for the one he had lost fighting orcs 3 systems away, while we burned, clicked as he handed out data slates. Brother Caelus suffered from catalepsy node degradation leading to progressive paranoid delusions. His actions were the result of mental breakdown, not heresy. Our gene seed remains pure. The chapter will endure. A lie wrapped in enough medical terminology to sound plausible. The other survivors would accept it because the alternative was unbearable. But I had seen the captain's face in those last seconds. Whatever he had read on that data slate, it hadn't been the ravings of a madman. What of the archaeological findings at Hadrak Hive? I asked. Destroyed in orbital bombardment after Xenos contamination was detected, Lucian replied smoothly. All records sealed, all witnesses relocated. Relocated. A euphemism that covered everything from memory wipes to mass graves. The Imperium's ability to erase inconvenient facts remains stronger than any weapon in our arsenals. The dead? Chaplain Golvin's voice carried the weight of his new responsibilities. 70, 3 brothers lost. Their names will be recorded as falling in battle against heretical forces. Medals will be awarded. Honors preserved. The official record will show that we discovered and purged a chaos cult that had infiltrated our fortress's support staff. Captain Dracus died leading the assault. Chaplain Mordius fell defending the gene seed vaults. Honoris Eternum destroyed 3 daemon engines before succumbing. Heroes all. More lies. But lies that would let the Imperium continue. Heroes were easier to mourn than traitors. Victories easier to stomach than fratricidal massacres. And Caelus? I asked, though I knew the answer. There was no Brother Caelus. Review your memories, Sergeant. Check your records. You'll find no evidence of such an individual in our chapter's history. The data slate in my hand confirmed it. Our records, rebuilt from backup archives, showed no trace of him. The victories he had won were attributed to squad actions. The honors he had earned were listed as clerical errors. The recruits he had trained showed different instructors in their files. 10,000 hours of existence erased with more thoroughness than any virus bomb. Dismissed, Lucian said. We have a chapter to rebuild. The others filed out, but I remained, studying the maps of our destroyed home. Lucian waited until we were alone before speaking again. The Inquisitor left something for you. He produced a sealed container, its surface marked with enough warning sigils to give a plague marine pause. She said you would understand its significance. Inside was a single-picked capture, taken from orbital surveillance during the Cascade event. It showed our fortress at the moment of detonation, a pillar of nuclear fire rising into the atmosphere. But in that column of destruction, perhaps just pareidolia, perhaps something more, was a shape that looked almost like a space marine in burning armor. Arms spread, as if embracing the flame or ascending through it. On the back, in Kastner's precise script, truth burns, lies endure, choose wisely. I burned the pict in the incinerator, reserved for contaminated materials. The ashes fell like gray snow, indistinguishable from any other consumed secret. But the image remained in my memory, that figure in the flames, transformed by destruction into something that might have been damnation or might have been apotheosis. The reconstruction began immediately. New brothers arrived from successor chapters, their gene seed verified pure, their minds untouched by our recent madness. They asked no questions about the radiation burns that marked the survivors, the way we flinched at certain sounds, the gaps in our fortress where certain chambers would not be rebuilt. They integrated with the smooth efficiency of weapons, adding themselves to an arsenal. I trained them in the same doctrines I had learned, taught them the same litanies that had failed to prevent our catastrophe. But sometimes, during close combat drills, I would remember teaching these same moves alongside another warrior, one whose name I could no longer speak. The muscle memory remained even after the man had been erased. 3 months into the reconstruction, we received word that Robert Guilliman himself would inspect our progress. The Primarch's resurrection had shaken the Imperium to its foundations. Here was living proof that the Emperor's sons could return, that the myths we had built our faith upon had substance. His arrival would either validate our continued existence or condemn us to dissolution. The fortress was barely quarter-built when his fleet translated in system. We had managed to restore the primary halls, the armory, one of the chapels. The rest remained twisted metal and radiation-scorched stone, covered with plastic sheeting that did nothing to hide our devastation. We stood in review formation on the parade ground, 200 warriors, where once there had been 1,000, our armor bearing the subtle variations that marked us as drawn from different origins. Guilliman's Thunderhawk landed with grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. He emerged in armor that made ours look like crude imitations. The armor of fate. Archaeotech beyond our comprehension. Every surface inscribed with victories that predated our chapter's founding. He stood 3 meters tall, moved with fluidity that our enhanced muscles could only approximate, regarded us with eyes that had seen the Emperor walk among men. Acting Captain Lucian gave the report with military precision. Numbers, statistics, recovery projections. He mentioned the chaos cult, the heroic sacrifice, the plans for renewed crusades once we reached full strength. Guilliman listened without interruption, though something in his expression suggested he heard what wasn't being said as clearly as what was. "Show me where it happened," the Primarch commanded. We led him to the crater where the reactor hall had been. The stone still clicked with radiation counters. The air tasted of metal and ozone. At the center, where the cascade had reached its peak, the bedrock had been turned to glass. It reflected the sky in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. "How many brothers fell here?" Guilliman asked. 73, my lord," Lucian answered. "Their names." Lucian began the recitation. I listened to the roll of the dead and heard the absence, that gap where a name should have been. A silence that spoke louder than words. Guilliman noticed it too. His eyes, designed by the Emperor himself to perceive truth through any deception, found mine across the ranks. "You were there," he said. Not a question. "I was, Lord Primarch. You survived the cascade. The apothecaries rebuilt me. And what did you learn from your death and resurrection?" The question hung in the air like promethium fumes before ignition. Every brother present held their breath. This was the test, the moment that would determine whether our chapter continued or joined the forgotten ones whose names were no longer spoken. I learned that duty is heavier than armor, my lord. That truth serves the Imperium only when the Imperium is ready for it. That sometimes the greatest service is silence. Guilliman studied me for a moment that lasted years. In his face, I saw echoes of the expression Captain Dracus had worn looking at that data slate. The burden of knowing things that couldn't be unknown, truths that couldn't be shared. Well said, Sergeant. Perhaps you might walk with me, alone. It wasn't a request. We left the others standing at attention and walked the perimeter of our ruined fortress. His stride covered 3 meters with each step. I had to move at combat pace to keep up. We passed construction servitors laying new foundation stones, tech priests consecrating recovered weapons, serfs who threw themselves prostrate rather than look upon a demigod. The Inquisition believes the matter resolved, Guilliman said once we were beyond any possibility of listening devices. They've filed their reports, assigned their blame, distributed their lies. Very efficient. Yes, my lord. They showed me the genetic data your brother discovered, the archaeological evidence from Hadrak, the crystal from his helm. My heart stopped for exactly 1 beat. My lord, the records show no Brother Caelus. I'm 10,000 years old, Sergeant. I've seen the Imperium birth and bury more truths than you have bolt shells. I knew about the Thunder Warriors' purge before your chapter was founded. I was there when the decision was made to break the legions, to ensure no single force could threaten the Imperium again. I know what my father intended for us all. We reached the overlook where our fortress's highest tower had stood. Now it was a twisted stub of metal reaching toward sky it would never touch again. The view stretched to the horizon devastation, giving way to recovery, giving way to untouched wilderness that didn't know or care about our small apocalypse. Was he right? I asked. Were we made to be replaced? Guilliman's laugh held no humor. Everything is made to be replaced, Sergeant. Stars burn out, empires fall, even primarchs die. The question isn't whether we'll be replaced, but whether we'll have completed our purpose before it happens. And what is our purpose? Whatever the Imperium needs it to be. Today, that's fighting Xenos and heretics. Tomorrow, perhaps something else. Your brother forgot that our purpose isn't to seek truth, but to serve it even when that truth is a lie everyone agrees to believe. He turned to face me fully, and I understood then why baseline humans couldn't bear to look at primarchs directly. It wasn't the size or the presence, but the weight of purpose made flesh, the terrible burden of being both more and less than human. There will be others like Caelus, he said. Warriors who dig too deep, think too much, question what shouldn't be questioned. When you find them, and you will, now that you know the signs, you have a choice. You can follow protocol, report them, watch them burn, or you can guide them toward truths that serve rather than destroy. Help them understand that knowing and acting on knowledge are different things. Is that an order, Lord Primarch? It's advice from someone who has watched brothers burn for both good and terrible reasons. The Imperium needs its weapons, but it also needs those weapons to choose their purpose. The balance between those needs is what keeps us from becoming either tyrants or ruins. He started back toward his Thunderhawk, and I followed. At the boarding ramp, he paused. The crystal from Caelus's helm, the Inquisition couldn't decode it, but I could. It contained his gene seed records, his service history, everything they tried to erase. He knew he would be unmade and wanted some record to survive. I've added it to my personal archives. He won't be remembered, but he won't be forgotten either. Thank you, my lord. Don't thank me. In 1,000 years, someone else will find those records, draw the same conclusions, make the same choices. The cycle continues. That's the real truth your brother died for. Not that we're prototypes or replacements, but that we're links in a chain that stretches from the Emperor's first vision to humanity's last breath. Each link thinks it's the most important. None of them are. All of them are. His Thunderhawk lifted with a roar that shook dust from our rebuilding walls. I watched it rise until it was just another star moving across the darkening sky. Around me, the fortress continued its resurrection, stone by stone, lie by lie, truth by careful truth. That night, I stood vigil in our restored chapel. The walls were bare of the devotional scripts that had covered the old ones, waiting for new victories to earn new commemorations. The altar was a simple ceramite block, unadorned by relics or offerings. It would serve until something grander could be built, something that would never hint at the blood that had blessed its foundation. I thought about Caelus, about the name I could no longer speak aloud, about the warrior who had taught me blade forms and battlefield philosophy, who had saved my life at Korthak's gate, who had died believing truth mattered more than survival. I thought about Captain Dracus reading that data slate in his last seconds, choosing to let knowledge burn rather than spread, about all the brothers who had fallen defending lies that might have been truths, or truths that had to remain lies. The chapel's door opened. Brother Marcus entered, still bearing the scars from his reconstruction, still learning to move in rebuilt flesh that remembered its destruction. He knelt beside me without speaking. Then came Brother Lucian, Chaplain Galvin, others who had survived the cascade. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We all carried the same weight, the same knowledge that couldn't be acknowledged. We kept vigil until dawn, when the work of rebuilding would resume. New brothers would arrive, new wars would be declared. The Imperium would continue its long collapse toward victory or oblivion, and we would serve as we always had, as weapons that chose not to question why we killed, only how efficiently we could kill. But in the quiet moments between battles, in the spaces between heartbeats, we would remember, not the name that was gone forever, but the question he had died asking, what are we really? The answer changed nothing. We would still fight. We would still die. We would still be replaced by newer, better versions of ourselves, each iteration further from human, closer to the perfect weapons the Emperor had envisioned. But knowing that answer, carrying it in silence, transformed duty from blind obedience into conscious choice. That was Caelus's real heresy, not the truth he had found, but the choice he had made to seek it. In a galaxy built on necessary lies, he had chosen unnecessary truth. It had killed him, destroyed our fortress, scattered our brotherhood. And yet, in the survivors who rebuilt from ashes, something of that choice remained. We rose with the dawn and returned to our duties. The fortress grew around us, stronger than before, built on foundations that would never speak of what they covered. New brothers arrived to fill our ranks, their eyes bright with purpose, their hearts unclouded by doubt. We trained them in the old ways, taught them the catechisms that would keep them loyal, prepared them for wars they believed had meaning beyond survival. And sometimes, rarely, one would ask the wrong question. One would notice the gaps in our histories, the silences where words should be. One would dig in archives that should have been sealed, find records that should have been destroyed. When that happened, we would remember Gilliman's words. We would guide them toward truths that served, away from truths that burned. We would teach them that knowing and acting were different things, that sometimes the greatest service was silence. The Imperium endured on the strength of such silences. Every space marine who had ever looked too closely at his own creation, every inquisitor who had found evidence of humanity's true past, every tech priest who had decoded fragments of the dark age of technology, they all joined the conspiracy of necessary ignorance that kept our species stumbling forward through the dark. Caelus had refused to join that conspiracy. He had chosen revelation over survival, truth over duty. It had made him excommunicate Traitoris, erased him from history, turned him into nothing. But in that nothing, in that absence that could never be acknowledged, he had become something else, a reminder that even weapons could choose, even slaves could question, even the condemned could speak truth before they burned. I carried his helm's weight in my memory, though the helm itself had been destroyed. I bore the scars of the cascade, though my flesh had been rebuilt. I served the Imperium that had killed my brother, though I knew it would kill me too when my questions grew too loud. This was the Space Marine's burden, not the weight of armor or the fury of combat, but the knowledge that we were exactly what we feared, replaceable, temporary, and absolutely essential until the moment we weren't. The years passed, wars were fought, brothers fell and were replaced. Our fortress grew until no trace of its destruction remained. New legends accumulated to cover old shames. The Imperium continued its eternal decay, and we continued our eternal service, each feeding the other in a cycle that would end only when humanity itself ended. I rose through the ranks veteran sergeant, then lieutenant, finally captain of what had been rebuilt from ashes. With each promotion came deeper access to archives, closer proximity to truths that couldn't be spoken. I found fragments of Caelus in those records, mission reports with his name redacted but his tactics unmistakable, picked captures where his face had been digitally erased but his armor's kill markings remained, gene seed records that showed a numerical gap where his should have been. I found other things too. References to other Excommunicate Traitoris incidents across the millennia, always following similar patterns, a discovery, a revelation, a choice between truth and survival. The names were gone, but the shape of their absence remained, like footprints in snow that had melted and refrozen. We were not the first chapter to face this test. We would not be the last. On the centennial of the Cascade, I stood where the reactor hall had been. The radiation had finally decayed to safe levels. New construction covered the crater, a shrine to the brothers who had officially died fighting chaos. Their names were carved in marble, all except one. That absence was more prominent than any inscription, a silence that screamed if you knew how to listen. A young scout approached, bearing documents for my seal. He paused at the memorial, reading the names of heroes he would be taught to emulate. "Captain," he asked, the question innocent in his earnest voice, "why does the count say 70, 3 dead, but only 70? 2 names are listed." I looked at him, young, devoted, absolutely certain of his purpose. In 50 years, perhaps less, he would notice other discrepancies. He would ask other questions. He would dig where he shouldn't dig, find what he shouldn't find. And then he would face the same choice we all faced. Truth or survival, revelation or service, the fire or the lie. A clerical error, I told him. Nothing more. He accepted it because he had been built to accept, programmed to obey, designed to serve without question. But someday, that design would fail. That programming would glitch. That obedience would crack just enough to let doubt creep in. When that day came, I would remember Caelus. I would remember Gilliman's words. I would guide this young warrior toward truths that served rather than destroyed. Or perhaps I wouldn't. Perhaps by then I would be dead, replaced by another captain who had never known the weight of erased names. Perhaps this scout would be the next to discover what we were made from, what we were meant for, what we would become. Perhaps his name would be the next to vanish from our records, his existence the next sacrifice to the Imperium's necessary ignorance. The cycle would continue either way. Truth would burn, lies would endure. The Imperium would stumble forward through darkness, guided by conspiracies of silence and fortified by foundations of willing blindness. We would serve until we couldn't, believe until we wouldn't, endure until we didn't. This was what really happened when a space marine was declared Excommunicate Traitoris. Not just the death of a warrior, but the birth of a question that could never be answered, a doubt that could never be voiced, a truth that could never be acknowledged. We carried our erased brothers in the gaps between heartbeats, in the pauses between breaths, in the silence between words. They were nothing. They were everything. They were the price of empire built on necessary lies. And we who survived, who rebuilt, who continued, we were the ones who paid it, over and over, until our own names joined theirs in the careful silence of unbeing.